Lesley Ann Foster is the founder and executive director of Masimanyane Women's Rights International, and she joins us now to weigh in on this bill and how she visions it will impact the fight against GBV as well as femicide. Doctor, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. Look, so the long-awaited bills and amendment bill signed into law. Firstly, your assessment of the bill, and do you foresee it having any significant impact in the current battle against GBV and femicide in the country?
Well, gender-based violence activists like those at Masimanyane are rejoicing today because we have been fighting for the last almost 30 years to get legislation that outlaws more strongly gender-based violence. But what it also does is provide strategic leadership to all of us working on gender-based violence. It's a very important moment for us because we believe that having the actual legislation in place means that we are going to have this National Council on Gender-Based Violence. It'll be similar to the SANEC Council, which deals with HIV and AIDS. This will deal with gender-based violence. What is important about this piece of legislation is that there will now be a way in which gender-based violence is anchored into our legal systems. And all government departments will be required to respond programmatically and financially to addressing gender-based violence. In the past, much of what we've been doing has been ad hoc, it has been sporadic, but not consistent. Having this bill in place makes it consistent, makes people accountable in government departments and civil society, and will give us the political clout to work at a much harder pace, at a much greater pace than we have been doing at the moment. And that is something that we can rejoice for because we have fought for it.
Doctor, I mean, a lot of people are saying, I mean, to your point there of course, this bill now anchoring, of course, these prescripts into our legal system. Men have also been victims of course, of GBV, more so in what you call it, same-sex relationships. And there is a concern that the bill doesn't necessarily provide guidance in terms of how then this will be treated. What do you say to that?
Well, we have a national strategic plan on gender-based violence, which already gives us the frameworks on how to address all forms of violence and where they occur and who they affect. We have that national strategic plan. What this does is the legislation actually makes it much more powerful. It's a stronger political support for working on gender-based violence. Now, we are not naive enough to say, oh, this has made a big difference or this will make a change and so forth. We're not naive enough to say that. We know that gender-based violence is deeply entrenched in our society because it is a patriarchal issue. It is an issue of power and control over the lives and the bodies of women. And patriarchy is embedded in all our systems, our political systems, our social, our economic, our traditional, our religious, our cultural systems. Patriarchy is embedded in those systems. So our prevention program, which is clearly outlined in the National Strategic Plan, and acknowledges that and sets out a way in which we need to address that. What I think we need as government, and I'm hoping that this bill and the National Council on Gender-Based Violence will actually now decide to have a countrywide program led and driven by the state that addresses the issues of social norms and of attitudes and behaviors that need to change. That's what you can't actually legislate for change. So this has to be followed up with programmatic work that brings about the change within communities and within our society. This is not a done deal. This is just giving us the legal framework within which to work and to push harder for accountability by state agents that are responsible for working to prevent violence and also to bring to account the perpetrators of violence.
Absolutely, Doctor. Now, I mean, speaking of that legal framework, I mean, cases of GBV often need a well-equipped and resourced, as well as well-trained police facilities and force that are the first point of reports, right? But we often hear sad stories of victims who never, first of all, get assisted, are often subjected, the president said this himself, subjected to secondary victimization by those in law enforcement authorities. So do you think this bill in its current self will actually try and address these critical steps?
Well, the bill does two things which are different and important. The first is we will now be able to get money assigned from Treasury for government departments to work on these issues, and to actually have, be able to put the money down on the table and say this is set aside to address this issue is a big thing. So having the financial support which the bill then provides is important. Secondly, I think in terms of the victimization and so forth, that's all part of a prevention program. And I've said already that we need a countrywide provincial program that is anchored in all of our systems, and we have an accountability mechanism. The bill does provide an accountability mechanism. So where we've had the National Strategic Plan, which is a framework for addressing the 6 pillars that we've identified as being critical to changing the tide on gender-based violence, this legislation actually makes it imperative that government departments address all 6 those pillars in a complete, comprehensive and strategic way, backed by the finance. So it gives us a little bit more impetus than we've had before. Not just the political will, but it's putting the money behind it and the accountability mechanisms. So we will be able to hold state agents to account much more strongly, because there is a law now that calls on them to do that.
Doctor, in closing, I mean, I hear you. The finance is one aspect, right? But what else do you think is still needed in order to combat the scourge in totality of GBV in the country? We've all heard about these talk shops and initiatives that seemingly just stay looking good only on paper, but fall short when it comes to implementation.
The problem is that we are talking about institutions and systems that have been in place during the colonial times. We're carrying the history of that. We have apartheid systems, all of which were brutal and anchored in violence. Now we're talking about changing those systems. Those systems have been around for 350 years. We need to put the effort consistently into changing, again, the social norms, attitudes and behaviors, and work with all of the institutions that base their ideology on patriarchy, and it's going to take a bit of time for us to do that. But there's so many initiatives happening. There are school-based initiatives that are happening. There are institutions of higher learning where the work is being done to change attitudes and behaviors. So we have to count all of this, as achievements as we move on, and small gains that we are making. The bill is a big gain. It's a big gain for us politically. It's a big gain that will have social implications. And I think the institutions that are very deeply patriarchal are going to be held to account much more strongly in this. But again, government needs to have a countrywide program that's consistent, that runs all the time, and works on changing social attitudes and behaviors. And I think we're going to see more work being done in schools. We're going to see it happening in universities, integrated into various programs across the whole of society. The National Strategic Plan takes a whole of society approach, and this bill now gives us the impetus to increase, or to scale up is the new term that they use, to scale up initiatives to prevent violence against women.
Doctor, thank you so much for your
change. Made toxic behavior is a big thing that we have to change, and it's not going to happen in a day. Thank you so much.
Doctor, thank you so much for your input. As always, Dr. Lesley Foster there of the Masimanyane Women's Rights International, saying we need to totally eradicate patriarchy in terms of course, the new bill that the president signed into law that seeks to deal with the issues of GBV as well as femicide in the country.